This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. All right. So what I thought we would do today, as Kelly mentioned, kind of a precursor to learning how to do an ash inventory in this particular method, is review and learn a lot of information about emerald ash borer and ash trees. Now, for our program, the Urban and Community Forestry program, one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is technical outreach and presentations and meeting volunteer groups. And as you can imagine, that has changed drastically in the last few months. So often when we come to a community to talk about municipal preparedness for emerald ash borer, the presentation might be an hour and a half to 2 hours, and then we have questions, and it's 2.5 hours to 3 before we get out of there. That would be a very long web call for everyone. So we're kind of squishing a lot of things into just an hour. So know that whatever information I cover, there's lots more information behind the scenes. We have a couple of pre-recorded videos, lots and lots of web resources to share. So if you see something today that's like, that's really interesting, I want to learn more, or, oh, I didn't quite get that, just make a note and I'll follow up with some material by email afterwards. And what this is a precursor to is really a training to use an app on a smartphone or cell-enabled iPad to do a roadside ash inventory in your town. So that is what I'll kind of give you a teaser for what that would look like. But that's not, this how-to part is not part of today's hour, or now 50 minutes. I will have my eye on the chat, but mostly Kelly has her eye on the chat, so she'll raise your hand if you have any questions, or if your mic is on, feel free to speak up too. So again, we'll kind of blast through a bunch of things. I'm hopeful that you can all see a slide that says preparing your community for emerald ash borer now on your screen.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see the dashboard too.
Like the GoToMeeting dashboard?
Well, the next slide and what your comments are.
Oh, All right, hold that thought. Nice part.
Then we can all catch you if you make it.
Yeah, I know. Now do you see a big screen?
That looks good.
Sorry, it happened when I carried my computer across the house. So, all right. So, I am going to at the end of this presentation, wrap all these slides into a PDF and send these to you so that you have them. But just some of our contact information, both Kelly and I, of how to reach us. And thank you, Kelly, for organizing. This was scheduled months and months ago to be an in-person event. So we've changed gears a few times. So we're going to talk today pretty quickly about emerald ash borer. Some of you, maybe one in particular, may have heard of this, and just kind of go over the high-level story of what emerald ash borer is, why we care about it. But prior to that, we'll talk about identifying ash trees. And this is something that we can review again as a group before people go out in the field, but certainly identifying ash trees and knowing what the scope of emerald ash borer, what its impact will be, really starts with knowing ash trees. But I think you'll find you'll quickly become an expert. We'll talk about how emerald ash borer has been spreading in Vermont, but then really try and beeline our way to planning for emerald ash borer, because that's sort of with you as a municipal audience, as opposed to a private landowner or a forest landowner, of which you may also be, fill that role. This presentation will really start to think about, as a municipality, how does your town want to address ash tree management? So is everyone here from Springfield? I think the only person I didn't ask was Harry, maybe.
Yes, okay. I am too.
And Keith. Okay, great. So that makes it a little simpler, because as we think forward to what Springfield wants to get out of a rural roadside ash inventory, that may be different than some of your neighbors, and you'll start to see why that is. It'll depend a little bit on your management goals.
Kelly. I think I was on mute when I mentioned that Keith is also mentioning he's from Springfield.
Great. So we'll talk a bit about general, really broad municipal strategies, and then do a little teaser about the rural roadside ash inventory. I know we got started about 10 minutes late, We'll still try to wrap up around 6:30, maybe 6:35, and then share a bunch of information afterwards via email. So here's EAB. It's not really that human-like in real life, emerald ash borer. So we're going to be talking a lot about this beetle. But first, let's talk about ash trees. So as I mentioned, you know, to understand really in your municipality, along your roadsides, and in your, you know, public spaces, the impact that emerald ash borer will have, we need to know what an ash tree looks like first. So we're just going to fly through a few pictures, and don't be scared if you're feeling like, oh, this looks like every other tree. How will I ever know which one it is? There are definitely a few distinguishing characteristics, and I hope that when we meet, fingers crossed, in this summer, we can look at some ash trees together. So here's a picture of just some, you know, the general form. And one slide that we've shared a lot in the department that I always really enjoy is this one, knowing your ash from your elbow. And it shows you a lot of the different pieces of the ash tree that you'll be looking for. So this is, you know, a very common tree in Vermont in our forests. It's not particularly unusual. In Vermont, we have white, green, and black ash. And emerald ash borer will affect all species that we have here in Vermont. For the purposes of your roadside ash inventory, you're not going to need to be able to tell white from green from black ash. Although as you become ash tree experts, you might be curious and you might want to learn anyway just to see the differences. But here's some of the form. You know, a lot of ash trees, they're very commonly planted as street trees in urban areas. They're fairly salt tolerant. They put up with kind of the rigors of city life. But of course, you know, if we knew then what we know now, ash weren't a good tree to plant because almost all of them will likely succumb to emerald ash borer. They have really, really amazing fall colors. As I've gotten to do more and more inventories in central Vermont towns, I've just loved seeing them in the fall. Often this really bright yellow, can be a little more purplish, but pretty striking colors. But often the easiest way to identify an ash tree is without its leaves. If you're starting in the summer, will have some leaves to look at. But what you can really notice about the ash trees is they're two things. They have very stout twigs. So you have the branches coming off the tree, but the twigs themselves, I think of them as like really stubby fingers. They're really fat. And also notably, the twigs are oppositely branched. So that picture on the left there, you can see a kind of a central twig coming down and then two coming off the side that are opposite each other. Now, some trees are opposite, others are alternate. You have one, then the other, then the other, then the other, climbing its way up the branch. Ash trees are always opposite. Now, you may be looking at your ash tree and notice sometimes what looks like alternate, that maybe one branch coming off the side, branchlet, doesn't have a pal. Well, often these can break off. The wind, a large squirrel, ice, whatever it is, may break off the partner. So make sure that you look around, all around the tree. Another very common oppositely branched tree in Vermont are maples. So you'll certainly see a lot of those on your travels. But really the ash trees have this very stout makeup to them as you look at the branches, they're very fat compared to a maple, which tend to be a lot more wispy. The bark, this is the bark of a pretty mature ash tree. And this is kind of classic diamond shaped on it. It's quite rough bark. If you were looking without leaves in the winter months, you might find some other trees that have a similar bark to this. The easy lookalikes for the bark are Norway maples, which are generally a city tree. They're invasive trees, so hopefully you're not seeing them too much in your woods. But without the leaves, the bark can look a little similar. Once you do see leaves, the Norway maple has a big old maple leaf on it. You won't mistake it for anything else. Box elder trees can look a little furrowed like this. Basswood occasionally can be a lookalike, but as you start to put together all the different pieces of ash trees, this bark I feel like is really the main distinguishing characteristic of seeing an ash tree, particularly as you're going by quickly in your roadside inventory. young ash trees have, the bark is often a lot smoother, but here in these larger ash trees, the diamond shape is pretty distinctive. Also, I find they're kind of squishy. When I touch them, they're a little softer than some of the other trees. That's not scientific, just anecdotal. So, ash leaves. On the left, you have what is actually one ash leaf, and it's made up of leaflets. And there's usually, I think, between 5 and 11 leaflets. So there's no one magic number for an ash tree leaf. Another common lookalike, again, is the box elder. If you look at the leaves, they are kind of innately compound like this. But you'll notice the box elder leaves are a different shape. They're not quite this egg-shaped and oblong with the point. On the right are some of the ash tree seeds called samaras. Ash trees are actually either male or female. So you may find one tree with lots and lots of seeds and another with no seeds. And the reason is likely whether the tree is male or female. But you may see some of those through the course of the summer, and then certainly during the winter, if any are hanging on from the winter time. Ash tree flowers, if you run out, maybe it's too late in Springfield, you might see some flowers on the tree. It's not the most showy flower on the block, but ash trees are often some of the latest trees to leaf out. So right now, while you're seeing the other trees turning green, you may find some ash trees with some flowers on them. Ash trees are wind pollinated, so we're not generally concerned about pollinators and ash trees when it comes to insecticides that might be used, and we'll save that conversation for later. But yeah, wind pollinated trees. So if you kind of tap the flowers this time of year, you'll see like a little explosion. Ash trees in Vermont, they're pretty common tree, as I mentioned, nothing super unusual about having green, black, or white ash. I don't know in Springfield, I'm guessing you see mostly white ash in your forests. I know once you get over to the Champlain Valley, you see a lot more green. Barb says yes, okay. Black ash you find often in wet areas, swamps, and that's the tree that is traditionally used for basket making. The bark can look quite different than a white or green ash, but the canopy, that stout, oppositely branched view into the canopy is much the same with the black ash. So about 5 to 7% of our forests in Vermont are ash. But when we talk about urban areas, I mentioned earlier that these are a pretty hardy urban tree, or at least they were until recently. We're finding downtowns with huge percentage of their downtown tree population being ash trees. So Burlington, actually, it's only 9% of their trees, but that's almost 1,300 trees, street trees, that they're interplanting between now and coming up with a plan to manage. So I don't know if our Springfield ash inventory will include the downtown as well, and we can talk about all that as we move forward. But in rural roads, you see trees that are often more stump sprouted. They have definitely a rougher history. They may not have been one tree that was planted on its own. But we have some towns that have completed their roadside ash inventories. So East Montpelier, I know they've got about 55 miles of road and they had almost 2,000 ash trees. I think Northfield is winning the prize right now with over 3,700 ash trees along their rural roads, something like 70 miles of rural roads. So really, as you kind of your eyes open up to what an ash tree looks like and where they are, you'll be surprised probably how frequently they pop up, which is why we're all here to talk a little bit about ash tree inventories and really getting a handle on, for Springfield, what the financial, ecological, environmental impacts are, and just public opinion. What are people going to do, think about when we talk about trees that are threatened? So quickly, and this in itself could be its own presentation, but here's emerald ash borer, the beetle. It's metallic green, has a flat back, and if you're looking at it face on, it's pretty both ways. It's sort of bullet shaped, and I don't know how big your screen is, but mine is really big and it looks awfully large right now. So the beetle isn't really that big at all. Usually 3/8 to half an inch, something like that. Here's a really fun slide of insects that you might confuse with emerald ash borer. And I can definitely see how some of those, as they're flying by, particularly the six-spotted tiger beetle. You know, as you're looking around, they're metallic and green. You might think that it's an emerald ash borer. I always laugh at the cicada. I'm not sure how those got mixed up, but that's also an insect. And what I've heard, and I don't speak from firsthand knowledge, but I've heard that emerald ash borer beetle itself is actually quite hard to see. Even in a heavily infested area, you're not likely to sort of have one land on your shoulder or something. It's really the larvae that do the damage to the tree and what we end up battling a little bit more. Here's the effects of the emerald ash borer larvae. So emerald ash borer is native to Southeast Asia. And in its home territory, it is definitely has a happy symbiosis with the ash trees native to that area. But our ash trees don't have any mechanism to combat or live in concert with emerald ash borer. And while the adult beetles do eat the leaves, it is primarily the larvae that kill the tree. And well, this kind of serpentine, they're called galleries, these little tunnels of the larvae that the larvae make are really what kills the tree. You know, 1 or 2 or 3, the tree will be all right. But once you get an infestation and you have the larvae squiggling all around the entire trunk of the tree, all the nutrients that would go up and down the tree are then cut off by these. You know, it's essentially girdled the tree in its own way. Barb is like, oh, this is all a review. Back to work life. So just a quick kind of sense on emerald ash borer and how it lives. And again, we have a really wonderful forest pest education coordinator in our program, Ginger Nickerson. She does really great educational presentations on emerald ash borer, you know, all the history and everything that we know and don't know about it. So I'll definitely point you towards her if there's just more community interest in learning more about the beetle. But the female beetles lay their eggs just like in the cracks of the bark, and the larvae, after the eggs hatch, the larvae start to burrow underneath the bark of the tree. So what you were seeing in this last slide is really if you were to just peel the bark off, you'd see these galleries in an infested tree. That larvae doesn't burrow deep into the tree. It's really just right under the bark. Eventually, the adults chew this little exit hole, D-shaped exit hole to get out after the larvae is turned into an adult, and off they fly to look for their next meal on an ash tree. So the larvae can actually overwinter for 2 years. They can be there just 1, but they can live for 2 years. So that gets into a lot of sort of what the danger of transporting the larvae is, that you may take down an ash tree in your yard. To be safe, you leave it for a year and then you buck it up and take it as firewood off to your camp somewhere. Well, the larvae may still be living there and may hatch out of that wood that's now been transported somewhere else and start to infest a new area of the forest. Super fast fly through some of the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer, which as you're out and about doing your ash inventory, I certainly encourage you to look for. We've been super humbled by how hard it is to detect infestations until they're quite bad. So again, there's a lot more resources on how to be a forest pest first detector is what we call them, and learn more about detecting EAB. But I'll just show you quickly a few slides, so just so you kind of get a handle on the effects that the beetle has on the tree. You may see a tree that has this blonding or woodpecker flecking. Remember that the larvae is just underneath the bark, and so the woodpecker is looking for a meal and will just flick off the edge of the bark trying to get to the larvae. If you see a deep hole in an ash tree, there may well be an insect there, but it's likely not emerald ash borer because it doesn't burrow deep into the tree. Canopy thinning. So you may look up into a ash tree that looked great last year and suddenly doesn't look so good. There may be many reasons for that. Ash trees have a lot of different troubles in the forest, but certainly emerald ash borer is one of those reasons, particularly if it happened fairly quickly. Remember now that ash trees are really only just starting to leaf out. So if you go out and look today, you know, I can speak for Montpelier where I am. It's easy to think that the ash trees are really unhealthy, but just give them another week or 2 as they leaf out and they'll catch up to the other trees. Kelly, one question.
Quick question. A lady here in town, or a person here in town, mentioned to me that her eyesight's really bad. She doesn't know if there are ash trees nearby, but she's sure she spotted a couple of emerald ash borers. Based on the bark description and the opposite branching, is it worth maybe Barb and I going up for a visit? There goes your Sunday, Barb.
Yeah.
Going up just to see if there's trees in the area.
Yeah, I mean,
should we wait till it leaves out a bit?
well, again, it's probably pretty unlikely that she saw the beetles, at least in the Springfield area. But not impossible. You never discount these things. Do you think she has any ability to take a photo?
Of the beetles or of the trees?
Of the tree.
Well, she might. I'll have to ask her if she'd be willing to give that a try.
Yeah, I can walk you through. We have a big red button called Report It on our Vermont Invasives website, and that's what we encourage people to do when they think they see signs or symptoms. But we can also touch base and be, especially because you are both there, if it might just be like a nice educational thing to do to go and take a look.
Yeah, I'm happy to look at trees. Yep. I'm happy to look at trees if that's helpful. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't want to volunteer Barb right away, but yeah, she'd be great.
I'm happy to do it, but I'm also happy to ask the Barb.
So yeah, I'll point you towards that Report It button too, just as you're all out and looking. Sending pictures via Report It helps us look at the pictures first to understand, first is it an ash tree, and then what are the other signs that we're looking at, and it saves people from running all over the state, and unless they need to. But if they do need to, we have a team that are happy to do that.
Okay.
Bark splitting is another sign of an infestation on emerald ash borer. Again, bark may split for lots of reasons, but there's another sign. Once it's really bad, you can, like that picture on the left, you could kind of just go in there and pull the bark off, and you'd see those S-shaped galleries underneath the bark. Epicormic branching, which are kind of these last-ditch efforts of the tree to figure out another way to have leaves. That's another sign of emerald ash borer. And lastly, these D-shaped exit holes. So this is how the larvae, once it's turned into an adult beetle, chews its way out, and because its back is flat, it makes this D-shaped exit hole. They're very small, and likely by the time you're seeing it at your eye level, if you're looking at a standing tree, it's probably quite a bad infestation, and there would be some other signs as well. And one more picture of those S-shaped galleries. There are other galleries in ash trees made by other types of beetles. The emerald ash borer is the only beetle that makes an S-shaped gallery in an ash tree. You can have S-shaped galleries in other trees, but the plot thickens on that. So this is these very distinctive and kind of telltale signs. Of course, to see this, you need to peel off the bark, and that is kind of a death sentence for the tree in itself. So you want to be sure that there's other reasons to do that. Bless you. So we'll talk a little bit about the spread of emerald ash borer. And again, we're kind of flying through the information. But it was first detected, remember it's native to Southeast Asia. It was first detected officially in North America in Detroit in 2002. So kind of as we move forward with all our discussion about what we should do and what we know, just keep in mind that that wasn't too long ago. That was only 18 years ago now. So there's a lot of things that we've learned and a lot more things to learn regarding managing an emerald ash borer. It's now been found in 35 states and 5 provinces. I could be behind a state or 2 at this point. It's very widespread. It's believed to have come over in wood packaging material, whether it was a pallet or some kind of a wood that wasn't processed in Southeast Asia before it was brought to Detroit, and likely as a larvae that hatched into adults, but no one knows exactly. And by the time it was detected in 2002, it's estimated that the beetle had been there for several years already. EAB on its own flies about a mile or 2 a year, depending on the other food that's around, which means that if it were to fly from Detroit to Vermont, it would take several hundred years to get here. But of course, we know that 2018, it was confirmed in Vermont. So naturally, it's being brought some other way other than its own wings. And we are transporting that ourselves via transportation of firewood, lumber, maybe even nursery stock. And again, this ash packaging material. It's always, this last few months, it's been certainly strange talking about emerald ash borer and slowing the spread while there's a pandemic that we're trying to slow the spread. It's very much the same message, that it is transported around quickly by people, and not intentionally by any means, but just not knowing that it was there and what the best practices would be to slow the spread. So ash firewood, this was just a stack of firewood outside a wood-heated, wood-heated oven at a restaurant. I think this was in Massachusetts. And a friend was just kind of walking by and wondered if there was any EAB in there. And like, sure enough, there was just one piece of firewood with that telltale sign. And this, if firewood is heat treated before it is transported, it would have killed the larvae. So this isn't necessarily like the introduction of emerald ash borer to Massachusetts, but just a way to show you that it can happen pretty easily in just one piece of firewood. The reason we are concerned about ash trees at a municipal level, well, there are many reasons, but the one primary kind of focus of our program that's different than, say, focusing on forest land or conserved areas is that we're talking largely about municipal ash trees. And those are ash trees by roads, by sidewalks, by buildings, and certainly on rural roads, trees that can fall into the road. And so I want to kind of stress that that's the lens that we're talking about ash tree management with, because there are so many reasons to leave up ash trees in your forest. But when you get to areas where you're looking at cost and risk to people, we're kind of addressing it a little more aggressively, I guess, in the sense that this is like if your city piping was all going to fail in a couple of years, you probably wouldn't just stand back and let it fail and then fix it later. I mean, some towns might because they have no choice, but there's an opportunity here to think about advanced planning. And what happens with ash trees is, we have this slide where there's a healthy tree on the far left, and probably within the first 2 years of an infestation, you really might not notice anything as a layperson, that the tree looks relatively healthy from the outside. But by year 3, you start to see canopy loss. You may see some other signs like that epicormic branching. And by 4 years, the tree is looking pretty poor indeed. And by 5, it's likely dead. So it's a pretty quick timeline, especially when you think about the thousands of ash trees that may be along some of these rural roads, to go from healthy trees to likely dead trees. The general premise, with some caveats, is that emerald ash borer will kill over 99% of our ash trees, of our native North American ash trees. There are some recent studies coming out noting some higher rates of survivorship of white ash, particularly where there are stands of dense white ash, particularly when they're farther away from an infestation, and looking at survivorship up to 15 years later, which is not to say they'll survive forever, but they've survived much better than other urban trees. So again, we're still learning, but the general, particularly in urban areas, the effect on ash trees has been pretty catastrophic, indeed. A common question that I get is, once emerald ash borer comes through and eats all the ash trees and kills them, and there's no more ash trees, won't it go away? Like, won't it kind of fly off because it's hungry and there's nothing left to eat? I wish that was the case, but it appears, and these are, studies from the Midwest where emerald ash borer has been for almost 2 decades. It appears that emerald ash borer is really here to stay. It's known to infest trees as little as an inch in diameter. So, something that's just a tiny little tree. And because you may get many either stump sprouted or, new ash regenerating, there's essentially like a continuous food source. We do usually see this kind of peak of emerald ash borer, which is the green dotted line, and that follows with ash mortality. And certainly once you've killed most of the ash, or the emerald ash borers kill most of the ash in your community, there won't be as many large trees left to take down. But there does seem to be this lingering effect of both ash tree regeneration and emerald ash borers, staying in our ecosystem. So there are certainly many attempts now to figure out a future for ash in our forests. It will be very different from the present of ash, but whether it comes to that small percentage that are resistant or can tolerate emerald ash borer to a certain extent, breeding trees, hybridizing trees to be more resistant with their Asian counterpoints, that's all underway. There's also some work with biocontrols, parasitic wasps that will kill the emerald ash borer. It's evolving, and that gives us a lot of promise to really think about having ash trees in some capacity in Vermont in our future, that it's not all totally the end for ash. This map here is, as of last month, the current infestation in Vermont. Now, the known infestations have been confirmed at individual locations. There may be, a place where it was initially confirmed and then several trees all around that area that are now infested. So it's not a continuous mapping area. But these the center of the red circles are really the known infestations that have been confirmed. And certainly when one appears in a new county, there's a large process to go through to make sure that confirmation is correct. The red area is what we call the confirmed infested area within a 5-mile radius of the known infestation, where, even though you might not have seen emerald ash borer, it's pretty likely it's there. And a further 5-mile radius, so 5 to 10 miles from that known infestation, is that yellow area, the high risk area. So you see some high risk areas that are creeping in from New Hampshire because that confirmed infestation was in New Hampshire, and then there's just a little river there between you and the known infestation. So this map is available on vtinvasives.org. I'll be sharing those web links, and we do keep it up to date with known infestations. You can see that it's not kind of a wave that's gone across the state. It was introduced on one side and marched its way across year by year. It's definitely this chickenpox look, which really only confirms more that it's being transported by humans rather than under its own steam. So I wish there wasn't so much red and yellow, but unfortunately there is. And Vermont, we were surrounded by known infestations in all provinces and states before finding it in Vermont. So I think there was certainly some feeling that we might somehow escape it, but that was a little optimistic. So here we are with emerald ash borer detections. And just going back to your question, Kelly, about someone wondering if they had it in their area, we're definitely still at a spot where we want to know where it is. And so reporting suspect trees is really helpful. Photos are pretty essential. And so I'll show you that website a little bit later.
Thanks.
Just a couple quick notes on why ash trees are concerned. We talked about them dying. We talked about maybe having a lot of dead trees very quickly in our public spaces. So thinking of town greens, village centers, urban streets, but also any rural road right-of-way. So the right-of-way is generally 49.5 feet wide, or approximately 25 feet from the center line of a road. It can change on some roads. It might depend where you are in Springfield, but that's sort of the rule of thumb for Vermont right-of-ways. So trees that are within that width are managed by the municipality. The tree itself still belongs to the landowner, but the management rights belong to the municipality to keep the road passable and safe. So these are not public trees in the same way that a tree on town land is a public tree, but they are publicly managed. And so there's really a lot to think about as a community of how to manage the risks of dead and dying ash trees. And they are very, very brittle trees. That has been the huge lessons learned from the other states that have dealt with emerald ash borer before us. The trees die quickly and the wood becomes very brittle. And remember that slide couple slides ago where we saw, a year or two in, the tree may look okay, when you look at the canopy, but the wood itself is already becoming very brittle. And I think that's this next slide. Yeah, there's that number 1. After 1 year of infestation, the strength of the wood decreases significantly. And so on an infested tree, a 5-inch diameter branch can act like a 1-inch diameter branch. So for anyone that's climbing trees to take pieces or all of it down, it's really dangerous. The trees don't act as you imagine they would because of the brittle nature. They can also, when they become more badly infested, they can snap and break in very unpredictable places. So that may mean that if you or a staff or a professional is working at ground level with a chainsaw perhaps to take down an infested tree, it may snap much higher up, 20, 40 feet in the air and fall. Utility companies in further south in New England, they do not send their staff climbing any trees because of knowing that emerald ash borer is in the area and just how dangerous it becomes. So yeah, 0, the number of dead ash trees that should be climbed. Now you can still take down ash trees, of course, in other ways with bucket trucks, but some of the cheaper and more economical ways to take them down, particularly when there's something around your tree, like a house, a car, a power line, we'll get to that in a moment, that you should never be working around trees, certainly within 10 feet of a utility line. They just behave really unpredictably and are not safe to climb. So in many municipalities, it's the road crew that deals with down trees, and it's not their primary job, but it becomes part of their job when there's a tree across the road. So our program does a lot of work with municipal road crews and now with VTrans too, doing safety talks on what it means to deal with infested trees and why it becomes not only more dangerous to deal with them, but also more expensive. You're not just going to send someone up to the bottom and take it down with a chainsaw if it could shatter and fall in all kinds of ways above you. And often our road crew, they have experience with chainsaws, but they may not be professional arborists by any means, and it becomes a pretty risky proposition to be dealing with these trees once infested. So you can imagine that during storms, if we're dealing with brittle trees, our ice storms and snowstorms will only get worse. And that's not only is there more risk in dealing with trees that are partially fallen or more easily snapping, but when they do fall, they tend to kind of shatter and explode. So there's quite a bit more cleanup to do if that's on your roads. Vermont's approach, this slide is really just to say that there are a lot of players involved. Emerald ash borer wasn't news for Vermonters. We definitely were planning for it, both in our Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation and then many other state and federal agencies. The entire state of Vermont is in a statewide quarantine now when it comes to moving ash wood. Now, another common question is, oh my gosh, there's a quarantine, I should cut it all down now and get rid of it because I won't be able to move it anywhere because the quarantine will only get worse. And while there are many, many reasons not to move ash trees and keep them local, there certainly is still the ability to sell ash wood within the quarantined area, which is most of the East Coast of America. So there are some counties in New Hampshire and in Maine that are not part of this quarantine. But just know that, rather than trying to quarantine county by county, which is quite energy intensive and staff intensive, the state decided to go with the statewide quarantine. And note that the federal quarantine, all these states that are part of this quarantine zone, is up for deregulation. As far as I've heard, it hasn't happened yet. But really the takeaway from that is Vermont has done such a good job of keeping emerald ash borer out of its forests that we are now kind of late to the party. And when it comes to federal funding and guidelines to help with control and management and money coming to towns, private landowners, states to deal with emerald ash borer, there really isn't much there. The cost of dealing with dying and dead ash trees will really fall on municipalities and private landowners, depending on what you want to do on your land. Barb, you can jump in anytime if I've misspoken anywhere. Thumbs up. Okay. A lot of this information came from her. So I just want to share with you some important resources, and this would kind of lead us down another rabbit hole of the presentation. So I'll be sure to send these links in a follow-up email. But we have a lot of recommendations. Now, the only thing you cannot do legally is transport infested ash wood. So if I took down an ash in my yard, took a look, saw there were these galleries everywhere, S-shaped galleries, pretty much knew it was infested, and then decided to put it in my truck and move it elsewhere and sell it, that would actually, I could face a fine from the Agency of Agriculture. So that is truly where the buck stops when it comes to the rules around moving ash wood. But there are so many ways to slow the spread. And I did mention that in the great scheme of things, emerald ash borer in America, and certainly in New England, is kind of a new thing. And the best thing that we can do is to slow the spread so we can learn more about how to manage for the future of ash in our forest, while recognizing that many, 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 many ash trees will die because of emerald ash borer. These slow the spread recommendations, I'm going to try to show you just this web page quickly, change what I'm sharing on my screen. To this. Do you see a web page in front of you? Yes, okay. So this is from vtinvasives.org, and we have a lot of different resources on how to slow the spread of emerald ash borer. And it depends a little bit on what you're doing or wanting to do. So I'm not going to go through all of the different things that are outlined in these resources, but these are all 1 or 2 page PDFs about things you want to know about processing ash trees, if you're a forest landowner, what you might like to do to care for your trees or clear ash trees, and certainly about transporting ash wood safely and legally in Vermont. You know, the real takeaways are that the flight season, so when the emerald ash borer are hatching and taking off out of the tree and flying off to their next destination, is June 1st to September 30th. And so really, generally, any transportation of ash wood you want to have happen during the winter months, not June 1st to September 30th, when adult beetles won't be flying out. You know, the crux of it is to keep your wood local. Like many things, keep your wood local, keep everything local, because as we've seen, the easiest way to transport it is to throw some firewood in the back of your truck and transport it to another part of the state or another state even, and invite a new infestation to that part of the state. So just pointing out those resources are there. I'm going to bring us back to our PowerPoint. Which hopefully you see a big slide now that says slow the spread. Nodding. Okay, great. So considering the timing of when wood is moved is really important. Chipping or grinding wood. So chipping it generally to the size of, chippers all react a little differently, but kind of the size of a matchbook is considered treatment. So you can heat treat wood to get rid of the larvae. You can also chip it. And at that point, you've either chipped up the larvae itself, or you've put it in such a small piece of wood that once it is transported and trying to live and feed, there won't be enough for it to feed on. However, a piece of firewood, you know, maybe 8 inches long, something like that, is enough wood for the larvae to overwinter and hatch somewhere else. So now, kind of this final main chapter is about municipal management, which is kind of why we're all here. And again, thinking about the lens that we're talking about ash tree management. That's really a bit different than served areas, forest land, or even your private property. These are trees that are publicly managed and thus have public benefits, all kinds of benefits, and also public risks and safety considerations, and certainly a public cost to manage them. So we, as a program, have been encouraging communities for years to do ash inventories to really get a handle on what it is that they will need to manage as a community before coming up with a plan. Like anything, you can't really know what you're managing until you know what's there. Do you have 5 ash trees? Do you have 5,000 ash trees? Those are, what size are they? What do they look like? Where are they? Are they on our highly traveled roads? Are they really just, you know, on this one particular back road? And there's a lot of kind of things to weigh as a community that I'll kind of walk through but there's no magic answer. It'll be specific to Springfield and the different slant that that your town decides to take regarding ash management. So really the thing about municipal tree management is that there's an element of public safety. And that's not to say that the town can ensure zero risk anywhere, but the goal is to identify where risks are and manage accordingly within the budget and the ability and the sentiment of the town. So where will Springfield fall? I think there's really, there's a lot of different approaches. I imagine most towns will fall somewhere in a combination of all approaches, but we'll kind of look through at some of the options. This slide is just showing interplanting on the left. If you know you have some ash trees along a street that are headed out, you might well consider planting some new ones this year in a socially distanced manner, of course, not like the people in that photo, because that was a different year. So we can also talk a little bit about insecticide treatment. There are treatments that are done with a trunk injection that are very effective in terms of saving a tree for as long as you are willing to treat that tree. For municipalities, this may not be a very popular option, only because it's a lifelong commitment, monetary commitment to treating a tree. However, it may be an option. There may be some really important ash trees in your community that are providing a lot of benefits. I can speak for City of Montpelier, where most of our street trees are green ash, and they are treating some for the short term, say 5 to 10 years, to buy them time to grow other tree canopy. They're taking them down in a staggered way, keeping the benefits of the tree by treating it with an insecticide, before deciding to ultimately take it down. So just to be aware that that option is there. But that photo on the right, I don't know all the roads in Springfield yet. It's one town I haven't explored too much yet. Do you have a lot of roads that look like that? Dirt roads with forest? Probably.
We have a lot of ash trees on our roadsides, a lot.
And a lot of rural roads like this?
Yeah, rural roads and the ash trees aren't that healthy to begin with, so there'll be a lot.
For sure. Yeah, and I've definitely noticed that often the ash trees look a little sad even before emerald ash borer. So really this, it sounds like Springfield did an urban tree inventory at some point in its past, and it'll be fun to look at that information. And you can use this inventory to inventory urban trees. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. But certainly the kind of broader intent of this inventory is to look at the rural roadsides and really start to get a handle on how many trees are there and where they are and what size they are. So just to kind of sketch out a couple of options for the municipality. Again, this is Springfield as a whole, not just you and your land. So those may be two different things. Preemptive management, there will be a few towns that really decide that the risk and the cost of dealing with emerald ash borer later is not worth it to them. They want to start acting now. They want to start taking down healthy ash trees that they can be pretty sure will be infested, and start treating any high value ash trees in their community that they want to keep. Obviously, there's a high cost up front. It has to be something, whether you're keeping them or taking them down, it costs money. There aren't many towns that are particularly preemptive. I know of one or two, but it of course involves some community buy-in also. So kind of in between is selective management, where you're looking at a lot of different options for different trees, where maybe you're monitoring for emerald ash borer, and that may be you and your eyes out looking, or you may be keeping an eye on that map of Vermont of where we've seen confirmed infestations. You might be considering removals of some ash trees, and we may be talking about ash trees that are healthy. It's much more expensive to take down an infested or certainly dead ash tree because of the safety risks that I talked about. The tree behaves really unpredictably. So some removal of trees, may be healthy ash trees. Town of Charlotte has been taking down trees for a couple years along certain stretches of road, and it's been a big public process to understand if the community is okay with this. And taking down healthy trees is generally not a high priority for a lot of Vermonters. And so kind of thinking ahead to what that looks like is important. Question from
Hi,
Kelly?
Joanne. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I have something else coming up at 6:30. So
6:30.
unfortunately for myself, I have to log off, but I'm glad that you're recording. And I see that John Bond just joined the group too. So I'll be logging in for the recording after the fact.
Great.
And I'll be sharing it up with everybody after the fact as well. But I wanted to say thank you guys all for coming, and I'm gonna bow out.
Thanks, Kelly. We'll talk to you soon about
Have
the
a
next
great
step.
night.
You too. So we started a little late and we'll try at 6:30 now. So we'll try and wrap up in maybe 10-ish minutes or so, and then certainly open to discussion if anyone would like to stay longer. But we were talking about selective management, which is kind of this idea of trying to manage some trees proactively, but also recognizing, well, there's a lot of trees. We can't deal with them all at once, or maybe we want to leave some of them up. It's lots of reasons to behave differently in different areas of town. And a large part of that reason will be because of money. It costs something to do something. But that leads us to the last tactic, which is delayed management, and which realistically is the tactic that many towns will take, either because of budget concerns or just lack of capacity to deal with another item in their town. And that may say, well, trees die all the time. We're not going to do anything different here. Our road crew will help clean up trees as they die, and we'll manage the particularly risky ones. But we're just kind of going to let emerald ash borer roll through. So ultimately, at first, that will be not expensive. There's no extra cost of taking trees down. But unfortunately, there's not a no cost approach, because these trees will die and fall. And so even just the cleanup of that and getting the roads passable and safe will cost some money, and ultimately may be quite expensive in the long run. So, a lot of these rough estimates that you're seeing in yellow here, when it talks to removal of a tree, the cost of removing an ash tree will vary widely depending on where it is. If you're in an urban area where you're trying not to hit the library or someone's car, you're going to have to be a lot more careful about how you remove these trees. If you're in a rural roadside area next to forest or next to a big field, you may be able to fell healthy trees from the ground, and it's a much cheaper endeavor. But regardless, a sum of, say, $10,000 may help you for a mile and a half of road if you have quite a lot of ash trees. So it's quite an expensive proposition, even in a rural area. Again, there are many different ways to cost out removing ash trees, but even if you let them fall, there is a cost to that. So the last thing we're going to do, yeah, Beth.
I have a question. If you decide, if you're wondering about leaving the trees, especially in a rural area, to fall down and decay, will the emerald ash borers live on?
In that tree or in the community in general?
Both.
Both. Yeah, so whether you take down the tree or not, if you oh, I see what you're saying. If you let the tree just fall on its own, and let's say it fell away from the road and into the woods, eventually the emerald ash borer would leave that tree because there's no nutrients to feed on. But they certainly would subsist in the area, assuming there's an ash tree somewhere else nearby. So yeah, there were some attempts to kind of starve out emerald ash borer in some of the early infestations in the Midwest. They did try to take down all the ash trees in a ring around the infestation to really remove a feeding source. And unfortunately, I think between transportation by humans and also their own flight ability, that didn't work as a way to contain them, as it has done with other forest pests. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I've talked quite a bit about removing ash trees or leaving ash trees, and how there may be, honestly, maybe thousands of ash trees within the right of way in Springfield, at a rough guess. And the first thing is really to inventory, and this could mean different things for different towns. You may decide that as a group of generally volunteers, your ability to not only find the ash trees, but collect some basic information about them, namely their diameter, so how big they are, how wide they are, because that will affect how you might manage those trees when they're, if you need to take them down, where they are, their health, whether they're in the public right-of-way. So remember, the right-of-way is roughly 49.5 feet. Some of that right-of-way may be shared with a utility line, just the power line running down the side of the road. Now, those ash trees should be under the purview of the utility company. Certainly for safety, you never want to be taking down trees within minimum 10 feet, any part of the tree within 10 feet of a utility line. There are people who are certified to do that safely. It's just incredibly dangerous to be removing trees by utility lines. Who is the utility in Springfield? Is it all Green Mountain Power, or do you have many different people, companies?
I don't know.
Green Mountain Power?
It's Green Mountain, yeah.
No one else?
Not that I know of.
No, you know, yeah, it's probably Green Mountain. Some towns have many different utilities. I will say that Green Mountain Power and all the utility companies are, hi John, are well aware of emerald ash borer. It's certainly not a secret, and they're acting now, either putting away money or inventorying trees, trying to understand where the ash trees are, how big they are, where emerald ash borer is. It is their business to keep their lines up and providing electricity, so they are definitely on top of it. That being said, particularly with Green Mountain Power, they have only a certain amount of funding, and as I understand it now, they're really only addressing trees in these kind of red infested areas. Those, remember, the circles all over Vermont. So, and primarily in central Vermont, they've been proactively taking down ash trees within their utility right-of-way. So we'll talk a little bit about this next time as to whether you want to inventory trees that are really in the utility right-of-way. You might say, no, the utility company will deal with it. I don't want to, we don't even need to know. Or you may say, well, we don't know when they're going to get here. We want to know the impact. We want the full picture. And you may decide to mark those trees as utility right-of-way trees in your inventory. You might also see private trees that, you know, that the right-of-way runs 25 feet from the center line of the road, and maybe at 27 feet, there's a 80-foot ash tree leaning over the road. You know, that tree is not managed by the town. It's a private tree, but you may want to know about it because there would be some impact to the road if that tree becomes infested and any pieces of it or all of it fell down. So you have some different opportunities within the inventory to mark essentially the management properties of that ash tree and start to paint that picture around your town. Maybe you have 3,000 ash trees, but only 1,000 of them are in the public right-of-way and are thus the responsibility of the town to manage. So we collect just, you know, location and health of the tree, the type of management right it has, and a couple other sort of simple data points. It's really just kind of a glorified tally with a bit more information that's geo-referenced of where ash trees are in your communities. So ultimately, there are many ways to view and map your information, and I'll share that with you in my follow-up email so you can just start to think ahead to what the purpose of the inventory is for Springfield. You know, some towns have said, we're going to be really proactive. We want to know where all the trees are. We want to know how big they are so we can cost out removal, and we're going to start taking down healthy ash trees. Other towns have said, well, we really want to know where the ash trees are. We know right now that our select board will say no and will allocate no money towards ash tree management. So really, this isn't a management planning and practice. It's really more of just a discovery for the town and understanding what the impact will be over the next 10, 20 years. Or anything in between. You know, there's lots of reasons to collect data, and we'll talk for Springfield about which data and how to collect that. One, so that you have the data you want, and two, so that you don't spend a bunch of time collecting data that you don't really need in the end, which is interesting to do, but when you have a limited volunteer base, maybe more work than you want to take on. Ultimately, you'll have a map that kind of looks like this. This is just a screen grab from some central Vermont towns. You see different colored dots that mean different things to different towns, and we'll walk through what that looks like. And you know, and even this map is even outdated. Marshfield has done a lot of work on their inventory this spring. Middlesex is just getting on board. So you're certainly not alone in doing an inventory. However, I would say we've got about less than 30 towns who have done a digital inventory. And knowing that there's 252 towns in Vermont, you're still kind of on the leading edge of thinking about ash trees and emerald ash borer. So you have definitely some community and other towns to talk with, but a lot of towns really haven't started to wrap their head around municipal management of ash trees. Couple last things for now of just resources. And again, I'll package up this slideshow tomorrow into a PDF and share a few more links. But I mentioned vtinvasives.org, so that website is up there. That's where we keep all our information about invasive everything in Vermont, but particularly on the homepage there, you'll see the emerald ash borer update, and you can get all that information about slowing the spread and identification and the current status of emerald ash borer in Vermont there. The other website I point you to is vtcommunityforestry.org, and that is the urban and community forestry website, the program that I work with. We have tons of information on essentially that municipal slant, like emerald ash borer preparedness or management plans from other towns, resources that you might like, videos you might like to see, all kinds of different information about costs, information about your tree warden, how your tree warden might play a role in this, potential updates to the tree warden statutes, sort of all that good information that gets into community management of trees, as opposed to specific information about emerald ash borer itself. So for example, on the right-hand side of the screen, you see our emerald ash borer management worksheet for Vermont municipalities. That's on there too. Lots of reading material. You can stay informed. We have an EAB update listserv if you're really wanting to be on the forefront of knowing when things change in Vermont regarding emerald ash borer. And our urban and community forestry program sends out a tree mail about every 2 months, which is an email that often highlights a lot of community work with emerald ash borer, because in the last 2 years, emerald ash borer has become a big part of our workflow. There are other trees in Vermont, but we talk a lot about ash trees these days because of this arriving impact of emerald ash borer. And our last slide of just a few takeaways of emerald ash borer, piggybacking there in some firewood, that it's, you know, it is here in Vermont. There's a lot of management that will happen in one form or another by municipalities, and certainly planning for EAB to just ensure safety and slowing the spread of EAB, managing costs, but also raising awareness. You might find as you're out doing your inventory, looking up to the sky, people will stop and ask you, often, are you lost, is what I get, because you're sort of looking around and at your phone as if you're looking for something, but then they'll want to know what you're looking for in the trees. So spreading the word about what emerald ash borer is. You know, the inventory is a great step, and there's lots more information at vtinvasives.org and vtcommunityforestry.org. So that's the mouthful for today. What I have done, usually in person, and Kelly and I will kind of think carefully, and with any of you wrapped in, about how we might like to roll this out in Springfield in light of COVID-19 limitations. There is an app for the inventory to do it digitally. You can also do it by pen and paper too. And I can help guide you through training for both of those processes. We can do that training either online like this, which requires everyone to come with their own smartphone and smart device, or we can think about ways to do it in person. I haven't done that yet since COVID arrived, primarily because of just realistic limitations around health and safety. So we'll kind of keep in touch about that. We would talk about the types of data that you would collect, and as a group, the decisions you would need to make about protocol, and then literally go through the screen and like how to tap and how to enter data. And I can share my screen and we'll look at those pieces. I think that's the next step. Questions or thoughts from anyone? I have the chat open too, if anyone wants to write that down.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
I think my comment would be that in Springfield, we might think of a priority of being just an awareness of how many ash trees we have on rural roads, because I think the potential cost to the town isn't clear until we have some numbers and some ability to say this is how many ash trees are going to die in our town and become hazards. So to me, that would be our previous inventory downtown showed us that we don't really have a lot of trees, street trees that are, I mean, in the really developed areas of town, we really don't have a lot of ash trees. It's the rural roads that are the real deal and that are going to take a lot of resources in the future to deal with those trees.
Great, yeah, and getting the diameter of the trees is important, and we're not going to be sort of out there like professional foresters getting it to the fraction of an inch. It's really more these bucket classes, like up to 12 inches diameter, up to 24 inches diameter, and that'll affect cost. We'll talk to the road crew. Do they have a chipper? If so, what size diameter tree can they handle? You know, that affects cost too. So absolutely knowing where they are and how big they are and who manages them will be a big part, is what the inventory is all about. Great. Any other thoughts for the moment?
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll send along a follow-up email. I have all your email addresses via the Eventbrite registration. And so it'll probably be more than you want right now, but you can keep it and file it away. And I guess Kelly and I will plan for the next step. That will hopefully be shortly to train on the inventory. Thank you all.
Thanks, Joanne.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
You too.